Hey, weren't you on a TV show or something?
Yeah, it was just a show. So, you're like working here? That's cool.
Only for a little while. I'm opening my own business. Actually, I should talk to you about it. I'm looking for smart people like you, Large. I should get your number.
Yeah, definitely. That'd be cool.
I'd like to talk to you both about a good opportunity for you and your loved ones. We all have dreams. I know I do. I'd like to talk to you about an exciting opportunity that people are talking about.
We gotta get going.
Oh, okay. It was good to see you, Carl.
Hey, I should get your number.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'll call you because I think he has it in his book.
Nice to meet you.
All right. So the point of that is, I think sometimes when people talk about their startup or open source project, they sort of sound like that. I really hope that I don't. I'm going to be talking about Exponent a decent amount here. So yeah, I hope not. So let's start right with that. So Exponent is a free and open source project that's built on top of React Native. And it's made by several of the core contributors to React Native itself. Exponent provides a native runtime, so you only need to write JavaScript. It makes the React Native workflow more like the web workflow, even more so than it already is. So I like to think it's sort of like Rails for React Native. So, like, where did this come from? What was the idea for it? So, what happened was Exponent was founded by a guy named Charlie Cheever, who was a co-founder of a company called Quora, which is like a question and answer site. And he was also an early Facebook employee. And his co-founder was James Ide, who worked at Microsoft and Google and Facebook. And then they sort of went off on their own and decided they were going to look at the problem of mobile development. So Charlie, when he was at Quora, led the efforts for the development of the iOS and Android mobile apps. And he just found it to be incredibly painful, just like most people who have built mobile apps. So when he left and he got James within, they were like, okay, we kind of asked this question, like, what's the ideal workflow, or like, what should this really look like to build native mobile apps on both platforms? So here are some of the sort of criteria. So there's, you need to have the native platform components, right? So you need to use the components that ship with the platform. Something that doesn't do this clearly is Cordova, where you kind of recreate the components using HTML and CSS. It should be all in one language, so you shouldn't be writing Java on one platform and Objective-C or Swift on another. You should just use one language on both platforms. And preferably also the same sort of abstractions to build the UI. Should be able to share the code across platforms. And so this might sound a lot like the previous point, and it is very related, but it's worth pointing out that something like Xamarin, although you're using C# everywhere, you actually don't really get that much code sharing. So that's an important thing to distinguish there. Another one is shared configuration across platforms. So that might be something like locking the orientation or like the app icon or whatever, various things like that. Another one, there should be a single workflow. So you shouldn't have to open up an IDE to build for one thing and then a different IDE to build for another platform. When you build your binary to ship it, you should just do it in the same way for both platforms. It should also be possible to make an app for either platform using any of the major operating systems. So you should be able to, on Linux, build an iOS app, for example. There should be a comprehensive set of native APIs. So you should have access to the hardware capabilities and everything that you can sort of do. Here I say from JavaScript, but whatever the languages that you choose. Almost done this list. So fast feedback, that's another really important thing. So you need to be able to have something like live reload or hot reloading. Not the usual make a change, compile, navigate there, see what happens sort of loop. Another really important one is it should be URL-based. Now, I guess it doesn't necessarily have to be URL-based, but the key thing here is that URLs are kind of the best system that we know of currently for sharing apps or documents in a very easy way. So URL-based is just sort of a simple way to think about that. It should be instant deployment. So we've been talking about code push a bit already. that should just be a given, right? You shouldn't have to go through a publication process that's approved by a third party anytime you want to make a small bug fix in your app. And lastly, you should have escape hatches. So if you don't have direct access to native APIs, but you're using some sort of layer that gives you compatibility on both platforms, you should be able to say, okay, I am going to opt out of this at this point, and I'm going to use the native APIs directly. So if we look at kind of a grid of how this compares when we look at React Native and Exponent obviously being built on top of React Native and the web, we could see that simply by just looking at the values that are there, that the web is a lot more similar with Exponent than React Native, at least according to the evaluations that I've made here. And so I'm going to, now in the following slides, kind of show you what Exponent does to satisfy these kind of criteria. So platform native UI. I mean, that one's, I think, very clear, right? If everybody knows about React Native already, that's something that's happening. You can see that the platform native UI on the other side is like divs and h1 and stuff like that, checkboxes, text input. So this is just our app that shows you the platform components that are built into Exponent. One language and shared code across platforms. This again is very similar to React Native, but a key distinction is that you aren't writing any native code, and any native code that you write, you're not going to be able to share across platforms unless you write it in C and then write some bindings and whatnot. So numbers that are often cited of like, we got 85% code reuse across platforms, that's usually referring to like the JavaScript code reuse, not necessarily the native code reuse. So using Exponent, you would get a much higher actual like comprehensive code reuse, hopefully, number than what it would be if you were writing some native code on both platforms. Another one is the configuration, of course. The configuration files for iOS and Android, very different, and you can't share those, and those are also not included in this number typically. Another thing is, this is very similar, like React Native, you can do this as well, but it's quite nice when you're just working with the one language that, like, making another language that's like a compiled to JavaScript language work on your platform is a little bit easier than when it's sort of the Wild West of installing and writing native APIs left and right, like most people have to deal with when they work on brownfield apps like what Leland was going through. So this is, for example, a ClojureScript template, so you can create a new ClojureScript project just from lining in. There's a link on the bottom there to a Medium post about it. You just say line new Exponent and then specify whether you want to use Ohm or Reagent, and it just creates the project and just works. Shared configuration. What that looks like in Exponent is you have this one configuration file. It's just a JSON file. So you can see in the video what's happening is I'm changing the loading icon URL that we use for the app, and it just updates. Go. Like the. All right. One workflow. So rather than using Android Studio or Xcode, we have something called XDE, which stands for Exponent Development Environment. Important distinguishing feature, I guess, of XDE versus the other tools is that we don't actually try and integrate a code editor inside of it. This just provides the tools that you need to create a new app, log, debug, deploy, things like that. Personally, I use Vim for everything, and I don't like it when a certain platform imposes some requirement that I have to use their IDE. And I think a lot of people are pretty similar. So within our company, we have people who use Nuclide, we use Vim, use Emacs, and Visual Studio Code is also a great editor. So there's a lot of stuff that I think people prefer to do rather than use Xcode or Android Studio. So what happened in this recording is just that I created a new project from a template. I opened it in the simulator. XDE just like downloaded the latest version of Exponent, started it up, created a tunnel. So this URL that you see in that bar there is actually a URL that anybody can access in the world. It uses ngrok to create a tunnel. So it's super easy to share your project immediately within seconds. anyone can access it. Okay, so that app, yeah, sure, let's say it looks great, the template, that's what we want. So here I'm going to build the APK for submission to the Play Store. So I just run exv build Android, and that goes ahead and publishes the latest version of the app. So that basically generates the JavaScript bundle, which is the app in one minified bundled JavaScript file. It pushes it to our servers, actually to S3, and at that point, it starts a build on one of our build servers. What happens when it's done is you get this URL that has the APK, and you can download that, and you can test it out by just doing adb install. So that will just install the app onto your phone like this, and there you go, you have a standalone app. When you want to submit it to the Play Store, you can just go to the Play Store, press upload APK, drag it in, and you're done. So that's yeah, pretty simple, and it's the exact same process on iOS with the exception of, in that last step, obviously, rather than going to the Play Store, you go to the Apple App Store. That's something that we ultimately want to also automate in the future, so it would be the same deployment process. We would just have to ask for slightly different metadata because the stores have slightly different requirements in that regard. So, okay, once our app is live on the store, we've heard talks about code push and whatnot so far. So with Exponent, that's just built in right away. So this app is live on the store, I make a change, I hit publish, and then go into the app, and I'll just close it and reopen it. And once it loads, then it has the update. So this would go to anybody who has the app, and it's really that simple for the workflow, and it's the exact same on iOS and Android. Okay, in terms of comprehensive native APIs. So I've said so far, right, we only use JavaScript. So obviously we need to have a lot of capabilities exposed to JavaScript. On the web, you have HTML5 APIs like Canvas and WebGL and Web Audio, and there's this very rich set of APIs. WebRTC is another one. So if you can't just drop down and write native code, there needs to be this very rich set of APIs available. So here are a few examples of some things that we built. One is push notifications, right? Very popular feature on mobile devices. So here's sort of what that would look like. Using the app, you grab the push token, send it to your server, and you save it. So the code for that, don't worry about the specifics. Essentially, I just ask for the permission, grab the token, and then you send it to your server along with some user data, the post request. So yep, all from JavaScript. Then when you want to actually send the notification, what you would do is your backend would do a post request to our notification backend along with that token and the message and whatever data, and we take care of doing all the rest of it. You don't have to think about it. And that just looks like this. So we just have a few server SDK libraries that you can install and call send push notification and push notification async in this case. Of course, a big part of push notifications is also handling the incoming pushes. So when you receive it and you select it, you want to respond to that somehow. Maybe you want to show a notification or something like that. So in this case, it's as simple as importing the notifications API and then adding a listener to it. And whenever a notification comes in, you can respond to it in this way. The origin will say if it was selected or if it was just received, and then you can navigate to some part of your app or show an alert or do whatever you needed to do. Another one is like camera. Everybody likes to use camera in their apps somewhere. Barcode scanner was very highly requested, so we've just implemented that. It's coming out in the next release of Exponent. Video right there as well. Leland and Airbnb implemented a really great map view component, and so that's just included in Exponent by default, which saves you, I mean, it doesn't take that long to install. It might take you 10 or 15 minutes to get it running on iOS and Android with plain React Native, but I mean, that's 10 or 15 minutes that you probably don't need to spend if you just use Exponent for it. Another thing that we're working on is WebGL. So we want to basically just get a spec-compliant WebGL implementation in Exponent. Our next release will include an experimental version of this. As you can see, it's embedded inside of just a regular scroll view. Each of these views has some fancy GL stuff. Just uses, right, you can use shaders like this. Probably a lot of you have no idea what that is. We're on the same page, I have no idea. Thankfully, this also works with 3JS, so you can do fancy stuff like that. Or, I mean, if you want a bunch of objects, actually, even this works a lot quicker on the device. The recording was slower. Anyways, you can try it out, well, like next week. And what does that look like? Thankfully, a lot more sane. And native animations. That's obviously another really important API. This isn't something that's available on the web either. The closest you have to that is like CSS animations. So Christoph talked about this yesterday. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it, but you can really create a lot of effects using native animations. We saw a little bit in Leland's talk, the shared element transitions. This is actually implemented purely in JavaScript and using the native animated module to do the transitions without causing any jank. And then on these sides here, oh, that one has an image gallery. So that's an animation. We're animating the scale of an image in response to a scroll event. Unfortunately, the only gestures that we can actually performantly animate in response to right now are gestures that come from a scroll view. So again, referring back to Christoph's talk, he's working on an improved gesture system, which would allow you to then run any native animations in response to gestures. Currently, what you have to do is, unfortunately, hopefully you all remember, if not, you can go back and watch the talk, call back into JavaScript every time the frame tick occurs or there's a new frame, and get the new value, update that value, send it back to native, and all that. There's a bunch of APIs, like you can check out our documentation for that, but of course there's still so many more to do. I mean, the amount of native SDKs that exist is crazy. Like the web has a huge set of APIs as well. We recognize this is an ongoing project. If anyone wants to contribute APIs, like definitely get in touch there. There's a list of things that are on our radar at least that we're looking into and or currently building. So going back to this grid, there's a really important point here, which is the escape hatches point in the top right. So React Native, you know, I've been talking all this time about, oh, you can do all this from JavaScript, that's great. But it is really, really awesome with React Native that as soon as you run into a problem, you're like, okay, I'm just going to write this in Objective-C or Java. I mean, as much as it sucks to have to do that, it sometimes is a necessity. And so basically, you know, how do we deal with that with Exponent? It's certainly the biggest trade-off that you have when you choose to use Exponent. And in the short term, it could be a problem. You could contribute back and add the API to our client. But what we're actually doing that hopefully within the next few months should be ready is we're working on something called Exponent View, which is a lot like Create React App Eject, but a less sort of harsh version of that, where rather than completely ejecting, it's sort of like a soft eject. So if you want to, you can come back into Exponent entirely, and you don't lose out on all the benefits that you get from being an Exponent in the first place. So yeah, Exponent makes Rails more like React Native, or rather, Exponent makes React Native more like the web. You can think of it as like React Native on Rails, sort of. It's free and open source. I really recommend that you give it a try. And one last thing I wanted to talk about is Agent Conference coming in January in Dornbirn, Austria. And Daniel Rotter is here right there. So if you want to talk to him about it, he's an organizer. And I mention that because there's an extra motivation attached to it where the other organizer just told me right now that he's saying he'll give 2 VIP tickets to attendees at this conference. All you need to do is create something in Exponent, send it to me by next Friday. I'll just pick my 2 favorite ones. Sorry, heavily biased process, but my 2 favorites will get VIP tickets, which means you can go skiing, you get your ski pass covered in one of the best resorts in the world in Austria, and go to a conference where we're talking about JavaScript and all sorts of fun things. So yeah, if you needed some more motivation, you could try that out. Also a bunch of other cool conferences, so yeah, I was going to end it there, but it looks like I still have a little bit of time. So I want to talk about some other exciting things to look forward to. So React Fiber is really awesome. If you use React and you haven't looked into that yet, I mean, it's totally experimental at this point. It's far from being complete, as you can see from isfiberreadyyet.com. Clearly, it's not. But that bar at the top shows the number of unit tests that are currently passing. So Fiber is really exciting because it allows you to pause reconciliation on parts of the tree and potentially prioritize certain things like an animation is occurring to make sure that that is able to be updated on every frame, or that you're able to respond to a gesture immediately and that doesn't get blocked due to the synchronous reconciliation process. Another thing that's, I think, is really exciting to look forward to is web workers are partially implemented on React Native for Android, but I think it's an area that has a lot of potential. So one of Ryan's coworkers at Microsoft actually got React running inside of a web worker. I think that's really neat, but there's also a lot of other stuff that you can do with it. Like, for example, with the barcode scanner that we have right now, that is currently just implemented natively, but there's no reason why, if you didn't have the correct primitives, that you couldn't send over, or hopefully not have to serialize all of the image data, but somehow communicate the image data from the camera to a web worker, have the web worker do some sort of processing on it and try and match whatever pattern you're looking for in that image, whether like snap code kind of thing or something like that. And I think there's just a lot of different areas where web workers could be really useful, because we kind of sometimes need concept of threading. So that's basically all I wanted to talk about. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome, thank you very much. Let's look at the questions, and we're back. Okay.
Oh, cool. Okay. What do you think about the Deco IDE for React Native development? I think it's really awesome. They actually have also done some work with Airbnb, some really cool stuff that I don't think they're talking about publicly yet, but keep an eye open for some of that. Maybe Leland will talk to you about it. I don't think it's my place to discuss it. But they are working on it a lot and making tons of improvements. I'm really excited for, I think, what that could be. Personally, I don't build apps using like visual tools like that, but I do see how I think Deco could be kind of an exception to that, in that it isn't focused on like drag and drop components into your app where you move it around and manipulate everything visually, but it's a combination of code and seeing the changes as they happen and being able to sort of intelligently analyze your code and make changes that yeah, you could see reflected right away. So yeah, I'm actually doing a workshop at React Europe with Devin, who's one of the creators of Deco, so check that out if you want to as well. One feature, one engineer, but the team of 10 engineers for a framework. I don't know what that means. If whoever asked that question, if you want to clarify, I'm happy to answer or try to answer. I just have no idea what it means. Okay, you can post it again, but maybe put it more. Yeah. Why not Sinatra for React Native? I guess because that's just React Native. So, yeah. Are there any big-scaled apps that use Exponent today? There's one, I would say the largest one that uses Exponent right now is an app called List. I spoke about it at React Europe. So if you want to check out that talk, I go into detail about some of the challenges that we had in it. It is, yeah, a medium-scale app. It was featured on the Google Play Store. We partnered with, I don't know if anyone watches The Office, but there's a really funny guy, Ryan from The Office, who's BJ Novak. It's his sort of company, and so we got some nice promotion through various talk shows that brought a lot of traffic to it, and it has a decent amount of traction. So definitely check that out. We only did the Android app for that, and so we built that for them as a way to drive Exponent forward, and then handed it off to them. So for more information about it, just check out the React Native talk, or React Europe talk rather, about that. Does Exponent solve the async interactions problem? Like, I guess the async interaction problem was specifically the, I mean, there are a lot of things that he mentioned in terms of async interactions, right? There There was like the portrait and landscape orientation. There was gestures, animations. So animations, yes. Gestures, I mean, nobody has a solution for that yet. We hope to adopt what Christoph is working on. We actually hired Christoph originally as a contractor to help us build out the native animation stuff, and we'd be happy to do the same, Christoph, if you're listening, as I've told you repeatedly over the last few days for the gesture stuff. So hopefully, you know, we want to make it really easy to build these apps, and it's something that would be upstream in React Native, though, ultimately. So if it does, then it would be part of React Native as well. How do you sign an Apple app without Xcode? You have to log into your Apple developer account, and then it creates the appropriate stuff for you. We download that, and then we build with that. What about the logs? How difficult is it to follow the errors? I assume this means, okay, I guess it's probably development. It's the same as React Native. I mean, it really depends. I mean, React is not always great for errors, especially when you're using promises, and I think that's been discussed quite a bit already. You know, it's very easy for promises to just have their errors be swallowed somewhere, and you have no idea where it came from. Yeah, if you're careful, if you build, I mean, it wouldn't be much different from the web, essentially, if you're using React there as well. Can you handle background notifications? I think that's a push notification. I'm not familiar with the term. If you want to ask that again and clarify it, I'd be happy to answer that. Tomek, you've shown lots of slick UX patterns on screen. Oh, I didn't. On screen. Yeah, there we go. Are they available anywhere for reference? Yeah, most of them are either on the Exponent.js GitHub account or on my personal one, which is Brent Vatne. Come find me later, and I can show you the specific repos that correspond to that. But we're an open source company. If something isn't open source from there yet, I'd be happy to just open source it for you and give it to you. So push notifications are sent through your servers. Yes, they are sent through our servers. Sounds like a lot of work if you need components that don't exist in component or an exponent. How do you solve that? So as I was saying near the end, we have this idea of an exponent view where you can sort of partially eject from exponent, and then essentially you can think of exponent view, at least the concept that we have right now. I mean, this isn't completely implemented, right? It's a work in progress, but the idea would be like it's like a UI web view kind of thing, but rather than that, you have this exponent view where you have your React Native view inside, and then you can write any React Native modules, and those will just be pulled in. And so it should hopefully be quite easy once that is available. Unfortunately, you won't be able to use our build system in that case, so you couldn't use EXP build, iOS or Android. Will Exponent work with old mobiles? So React Native, I believe, supports 4.1 and higher for Android. Basically anything that has the choreographer API. Exponent supports slightly newer versions only. I believe we're 4.4 and higher. We just have some different requirements, so it only goes that low. iOS, I believe React Native only supports iOS 8 and higher now, so we would be the same there as well. I mean, that said, the update cadence for iOS, once iOS 10 is released, like I felt like I didn't even have a choice. I just woke up one morning and I had iOS 10 on my phone. Because I was like, stop asking me to upgrade, and I accidentally pressed the wrong button somehow, and then my battery kept dying all the time now.
Thanks.
Cool. I think I exhausted the questions, maybe?
Great. Thank you very much, Brent. Thank you.